Welcome, everyone. Tonight we are to our discussion, dialogue, questions in the book of Revelation. And again, we have Shay and Austin with us again tonight. So we're excited about that. So let's just kind of jump in. And I think we have some very interesting questions tonight and some passages to cover, some fascinating questions, actually. So we'll kind of jump in and look at these. And so, Shay, you want to read us our first question?
Sure, certainly.
And we are in Revelation 15, okay? So it's going to be exciting. So kind of read through that text, and we're going to ask a few questions here. So read us that question, okay?
What does the sea of glass and fire represent?
Sea of glass and fire. Very good. So let's kind of first off read the first couple of verses of Revelation 15. And the question again is, what does the sea of glass, which has fire kind of in it, represent? So read that if you would, Austin.
Okay.
Revelation 15, verses 1 and 2.
Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last, because in them the great wrath of God is finished. And I saw something like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who have been victorious over the beast and his image, and the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, holding harps of God.
Very
one,
good.
two.
Okay, standing on a sea of glass, holding harps of God. And so we also have in this kind of fire mixed in with it and stuff. So sea of glass is a fascinating thing. It actually is kind of representative of something. And you see this kind of throughout the Bible, 4 places. Do you have, I think you have Exodus 24, 9 and 10. Turn there, Austin. I want you to read this. What is the sea of glass? And this one has fire in it too. So what does this represent? So look at that if you would. Read that passage there, Austin, in
chapter 24,
Exodus 24, 9 and 10.
Okay. Then Moses went up with Aaron and Nadab and these Middle East.
Abihu, yeah, there you go.
Abihu, and 7 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the sky itself.
Okay. God was pictured in this scene in Exodus 24, 9 and 10. And he was described as a pavement, and it was sapphire, so this bluish color. Now, the reason I said that is these saints are on a crystal sea, and fire is mixed in it. If you go back into, you have Ezekiel 1. Read
Yes.
22 through 28. This is fast. Keep that. Okay, God is pictured as his being on a pavement that's blue. Now, this is important because God seems to be, if you will, almost standing on something. Now read this in Ezekiel 1, 22 through 28.
Now, over the heads of the living beings, there was something like an expanse, like the awesome gleam of crystal spread out over their heads.
Okay, let's stop for a moment. Okay, in Ezekiel, you have these angels, probably cherubim here, and they really match the 4 living creatures in Revelation. Remember we talked about those? Okay. And they seem to be holding like this same pavement. It is the movable throne of God. God's everywhere. And over their head an expanse. And read that, what that expanse was again. Describe that expanse.
Like the awesome gleam of crystal spread out over their heads.
Okay. That's important. There's like a crystal platform over their head. Now read on.
Okay? Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other. Each one also had 2 wings covering its body on the side and on the other. I also heard the sound of their wings like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like that sound of an army camp. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance. And on that which resembled a throne, high up, was a figure with the appearance of a man.
So what man do you think that is?
Jesus? God?
Read on.
Okay. Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward I saw something like fire, and there was a radiance around him. As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking.
Yeah. This is God. This is God. And what is it, the thing about Ezekiel that's interesting? Go back to Exodus. Moses goes up and he sees this vision of God, and he's on a pavement that is sapphire. It's blue. Okay. Here, the angels seem to be carrying the throne of God, but they're not like carrying God. They seem to be carrying almost this crystal platform that God is on. Now, this kind of, okay. Now, and we talked about the sea of glass in Revelation 15, sea of glass mixed with fire. Okay. Read in, I think you got Revelation 4. Okay. Read Revelation 4, a couple of verses there, 5 and 6. Or just read verse 6 is fine. That's good enough.
Okay. And before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. And in the center and around the throne, 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind.
Okay. So, think of it. In Exodus, this vision of God, God's on this sapphire pavement. It's described as a sapphire pavement, blue pavement. In Ezekiel, as God is coming, and these angels seem to be carrying him. Now, God can do anything. He's omnipresent and go anywhere he wants to, but there seems to be this pavement, okay? And then in chapter 4, it's described, Revelation chapter 4, verse 6, it's described as a sea of glass before the throne. And then over in chapter 15, it's described as a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those that have been victorious are on this. So why is God always pictured kind of above this pavement or this sea of glass, or why is God always kind of up there, do you think? And this pavement, sea of glass, whatever you want to call it, it's called, these are 4 passages in the Bible that deal with it. Both of them in Revelation called a sea of glass. It's called a pavement in Exodus, and then Ezekiel is called an expanse, crystal expanse. So what does all this represent and mean, do you think?
Maybe what's below the expanse. I don't
Like
know.
division.
Division, very good. Very good. I think we're getting somewhere now. This sea of glass represents a division. It represents, in a sense, God's domain, and it represents our domain. Now, the problem is God's domain, or the reality of the problem. The reality is God's domain is not limited. But at any rate, it is division in the sense that it represents kind of what separates us from God. And so, the sea of glass, the saints are pictured as standing on the sea of glass. These ones that are saved now are standing on the sea of glass. Now, the sea of glass is sometimes blue. So it's almost as if they're in heaven. And Paul writes that we see through a glass darkly. Remember that passage? To the church of Corinth?
Dimly,
Yes.
right?
We see through a glass darkly. Okay. That means we have a hard time seeing. Now, where God is seated above this sea of glass, can he see us?
Yes.
Yes. Why do you think when it goes to Revelation 15, it's called a sea of glass like crystal in Revelation? In fact, read Revelation 4:6 and let's compare that with Revelation 15.
Okay. 4:6 says, and before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. And in the center and around the throne, 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind.
Okay, it's crystal clear, okay? Why in Revelation 15 it is described as a sea of glass mixed with fire, do you think?
Purification, judgment.
Judgment. I think there's judgment. In other words, the judgment of God is taking place on earth. It is as if the saints of God that are there are looking down, a sea of glass mixed with fire. And so this is an incredible scene. The sea of glass represents the division where we cannot go unless God allows. Remember Revelation 4:1, a door standing open in heaven? It represents very clearly the division between God's domain. Now, God can pass through that, but guess what? We can't unless God invites us to pass through it. And so that's kind of one of those fascinating things is that, and God's saints are, you have to be invited up into God's presence to get there. So that is a fascinating. And I would say it's actually a very challenging interpretation to get, but that's what we believe, and I do believe that is correct. I'm not saying that I have all the answers here by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a division that separates us from God and the holiness of God. Think of it when you pray this way: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The division of where God rules and reigns. He rules and reigns everything, but ultimately he's going to rule and reign over all the earth. And it's kind of, okay, let's go to the next question. We can say some other things about this sea of glass kind of in regard to the next question.
Yeah, because one commentary I was reading said that represented something like the water outside of the tabernacle, the thing that was called the sea, and that
Yeah, the sea was outside of the, and actually it was in Solomon's. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It was in Solomon's temple that he built. It was called the sea. It was this massive bowl. It was almost like a swimming pool. It was on 12 bulls. Okay, and it was utilized for ceremonial cleaning and everything. So that was referred to as, it was so big, it was like a swimming pool. It was referred to as the sea. Well, think of this. That was used for purification. Okay, the sea of glass represents where the holiness of God is. Think of that in that light. Okay, that water was used as purification. Okay, where God is holy. Does that make sense? Do you see the connection there between the two? Okay, so it's not just that was referred to as the sea, it's represented, and it's consistent. Remember, the earthly things are a pattern of the heavenly things, okay? But the heavenly things are the real ones. So let's look at this next question, and we can come back to that a little bit more.
Okay. The next one says, who are the victorious ones over the beast? Are these the ones who died because they refused to worship the beast and take the mark?
Yes, next question.
I love it when they're that easy.
No, that's it. Let's do talk about that for a moment. But that is correct. These are, and read verses 1 and 2 again, Austin, because we talked about the sea in just a moment. So let's talk about who is on the sea, and
Then
that's what we got.
Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last, because in them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw something like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who have been victorious over the beast and his image and the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, holding harps of God.
Okay.
So is this specifically the people that endured the tribulation and the mark of the beast, or is this just all saved souls?
Yeah, and that's a good question, Austin. I think in particular here is talking about the tribulation saints. Now, the other saints, the raptured saints, are going to be in heaven too.
Right.
So they're going to be there at the same time. But it says in particular here, who had been victorious over the beast and his image and the number of his name. So this is talking pretty clearly, I think, about tribulation saints. Yeah. They are there. Now, this is interesting. They are there. So they're up there. Now remember what we say about this sea of glass, the same sea of glass, but what's different about it now in chapter 4 is it is mixed with fire. You get the image? Here are the tribulation saints, the raptured saints are there too. They're standing on the sea of glass, and they're looking down, and what do they see taking place on the earth?
Fire.
Sickle and the grapes.
The bowls.
Yes, all that. Judgment, the bowls of wrath. This is interesting. If you were killed for your faith, would you call that a victory or a loss? The world would call it a loss.
A loss. I was
victory.
just thinking about that this morning.
Yep. It is a victory. In Christ, this is going to be strange, but in some sense you win by losing. They nailed Jesus to the cross.
It's a strategy.
Yeah, and it really is. It's a divine strategy. But anyway, here are these tribulation saints, and that's who these are. And they're standing on the sea of glass. Remember they prayed, "How long, O Lord?" Back in chapter 5. "Holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell there?" And they was given each of them white robe, and they were told there's a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and brethren were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. Well, now those prayers have been answered. Okay, and you see this taking place. So they are victorious over the beast. Those that took the image of the beast, the number of his image, the number of his name, the number of the beast, they're on earth. Okay, and these are on the other side. They're the sea of glass that separates. Again, the sea in Solomon's temple that was where the water was used for the purification, representing the holiness. This is representing those that have been made holy by the blood of Jesus Christ. And they're literally looking down and seeing judgment that is taking place on the earth.
And at this time, isn't the division opened up so the people on earth can see into heaven too, where the angels are flying around and all that? So can they see those saints?
Now that is interesting. Let's go back to that. The veil between the physical and the spiritual seems to be lifted up, and so they can see angels flying in midair. I wouldn't necessarily say though that they are looking into heaven. I don't know that would be that. I don't think that kind of a writer wrote that during the tribulation, the paranormal becomes the normal, and I don't want to go crazy with paranormal stuff, but definitely it becomes the norm to see spiritual things like angels and demons that are released and all like that. But this is still holy, and this is still the domain of God, and so I can't really answer that question if they can see there.
Ha ha.
So
Stumped you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, we need to say.
We don't need to do this anymore. Wednesday night's over. We've accomplished it.
Well, I could be
No, we're good.
a little smart, but anyway, go ahead. But anyway, so these are the tribulations. But let's go on to the third question. We don't have time to get away
Okay,
from
yes.
this, Dylan.
All right, so the third question says, why is only Moses mentioned in conjunction with the Lamb? And I was wondering because other saints have been called faithful and good saints in their time, but why specifically Moses?
Okay. This is called the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. And the reason that Moses is referenced here is Moses delivered the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt and took them to the promised land. That was a very real thing. That was also a type of the deliverance of Jesus Christ and taking people out of the bondage of sin into not just the physical promised land, but the true spiritual promised land. And so what it is that Moses led the Exodus out of Egypt into the promised land. This isn't, these tribulation saints here, they have exited the earth, the domain of Satan, and they have been brought into heaven. They, in a sense, it's a sense of an exodus, exiting out of this world into God's presence. And so that's why Moses is utilized here. And then if you go back, it calls the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. And at one time I thought these were two songs, but it's actually one song, the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. They're singing the deliverance of God for the children of Israel. And at the same time, they are singing a song, apparently, that talks about the deliverance of God bringing them. They're praising God. They're singing gloriously reflecting on what God has done as they're looking at the judgment that's taking place on the earth. Think of those that took the mark of the beast are now being judged. Those that released. And they break into this praise of singing here, and they're singing the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. The first deliverance was a very real deliverance, a very physical deliverance, but it was also a picture of the ultimate deliverance that was going to come through Jesus Christ. So it's an incredible scene here. And so that's why I think that you specifically have Moses. And it's not just generally, okay, some of these other great saints of God. There's a specific reason, because the Exodus, this represents an exodus out of the domain of Satan, the world, the beast, into the domain of God. So it was a deliverance that God brought full circle here.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I get that now.
Does that make
Nice,
sense?
yes.
Okay, yes, very good.
All
Very
right.
good.
So we got 5 or 6 minutes. You want to go on to the next one?
Yeah, we can do that.
Or do you want to talk about that one some more?
Well, was there anything else that we have? Because this is a fascinating thing, that it is the Song of Moses. It's just really one thing to remember, because if you think about it, okay, the Exodus, where did they Exodus from, and where did they Exodus to?
Moses took them out of Egypt,
And into where?
Israel.
Yeah, the Promised Land. And that's all, and we pretty well covered that, so let's go on to the next question.
Okay. Numbers are clearly important to God, and again, he uses 7 angels and 7 plagues. But why are there 21 judgments total instead of just 7?
Well, you can do a lot with numbers, can't you, Shay?
Yes.
You can play with numbers, and you can make numbers say anything you want to. Some people ask me how many people go to church. I said, well, there's a lot of ways to count how many people at church. You can count them by how many people on the church roll. You can count them by how many people are in the congregation on a Sunday. You can count them by Sunday school. There's a lot of ways to count it. So just to say that, you ask, why are there 21 judgments and not 7? Now remember, how many seals are there?
7.
There are 7 seals, okay? So, there are also 7 bowls of wrath. 7 trumpets and 7 bowls of wrath. So if you counted 3 sevens, you'd have 21. But remember this. The 7th seal is made up of the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls of wrath. So in a sense, you do have 7. And really what you have here is 7 times 3. Now remember, 3 is a number that's very important in God's economy. It's used a triune. It is also a number of completion, not quite the number that 7 is a number of completion. So really, in this thing, you have 7 judgments times 3 is what you have. So there really are 7 judgments, and 7 is important, but you have it times 3. And that's where you get kind of this maximum emphasis on 7. 7 seals. Everything's under those 7 seals. But then the 7th seal also has 7 trumpet blast judgments. And the 7th trumpet blast has 7 bowls of wrath judgment. So you have 7 times 3. So it really is 7. And to count as 21, if you counted the 3 times, 7, you would have 21. But it's really a 7-fold repetition 3 times in that 7th judgment. So it really is 7 3 times, and I would think it's better to think of that than it is 21, because if you read it, that's kind of the way it is presented. 7, 7, 7. So what it is this absolute completion. And so that's why 7 kind of stands out again and again and again as kind of being so important in that whole process and everything, if that makes sense.
That's
It
pretty
does.
cool.
Yeah.
And, obviously, we've seen many, many times that he repeats things for us in case we don't get them the first 2 times. So maybe we got it after the 3rd time.
Yeah. So kind of put this whole thing together with all the questions we asked. The sea of glass itself, and maybe these 4 questions we kind of end with this kind of little moment of discussion. The sea of glass itself represents what separates sin from the holiness of God. It represents kind of God's domain. And then you have these tribulation saints that have been saved out of the world, standing on the sea of glass. They're looking down and seeing judgment that is taking place on earth. And then they're singing, as they're looking down, seeing this judgment take place on the earth, and they're seeing God, because chapter 4 said the sea of glass is before the throne. So literally the throne of God is right there next to them, and they're singing praises, the song of deliverance of Moses and the song of the Lamb. So they're singing this song. It's an incredible song. If you go back into Exodus 15 and you read that, we don't have time to do that, but it's a song as they got, and think of it, here's another thing. When did they sing the song of Moses? They sang the song of Moses when they got on the other side of the Red
Red
what?
Sea.
Sea.
Yeah.
It's a sea. It's a sea they came to, the Red Sea. And they're looking down this fire. The imagery you can't make this stuff up. You just can't. Okay, they're coming through this sea and the deliverance. And the horse and the rider have been defeated in the sea, talking about the Egyptian army. That's all that. And they get on the other side and they sing. So yeah, it's natural. This was done with the deliverance of Moses. Why would you do it with the deliverance of Jesus Christ? They break into the song, and what it is, when they go back and they're reciting what Moses had done, it's this remembrance. God was delivering us all along, and we never saw it. And think of that. Every day God delivers us. Do we really see what God is doing to deliver us every day? I mean, it's such an incredible thought, isn't it, to know that God is delivering us. So the thing is, they're on the sea, they're on God's side, they're looking down and seeing the judgment, and they're not participating in that judgment. And they have eternal life because they died for their beliefs. Do you see this? They won by dying. That's an incredible thought, isn't it?
It is.
Because Jesus always says, if a man is not willing to take up his cross and follow me, he cannot be my disciple. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made a statement. When God calls a person to follow him, he calls him to come and die. That's an incredible statement if you think about it, because I don't want to lose, but these are victorious. That's another thing. The whole concept of victory in the book of Revelation, conquest is talked about 19 times in the New Testament. 17 times that appears in the book of Revelation. Victory, conquest, and how we get that, and the question, you have to be counterintuitive. You win by losing. Jesus said what? The last shall be first and the first shall be last.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a very different way of thinking. So here they are. And of course, the number 7. The 7 bowls of wrath are now being poured out. And that obviously represents the completion of everything that God does. So fascinating chapter. This is one of the more, I mean, it's kind of one of the first time you look at this chapter, I can remember reading this and going, what in the world? Your head spinning like so much. But I will say this to everybody out there as we close. Revelation is not as complex as we make it. And if we understand the Old Testament, it actually becomes kind of, because there's so many allusions to the Old Testament stuff. So maybe that's about as far as we can go tonight.
And I do just like the end of it, too, the end of this chapter, talking about the temple being filled with God's glory. I always like Shekinah.
Yes. And I will say this. The second half of of chapter 15 really is an introduction to chapter 16, where they actually come and pour out the bowls of wrath. But yes, after they sing this praise to God, then judgment for those. And when you get into chapter 16, I mean, these are direct judgments on the heart of the beast. I mean, these are direct. This isn't just generalized stuff like maybe it's bad stuff in the 7 trumpet blast, but this is going straight at the beast. And
If obedience doesn't talk you into it, hopefully fear will.
yes, what does June say? Save some by fire.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. All right.
Read chapter 16.
There you go. All right, we'll be in that next week. God bless. Y'all have a great evening.